Over my many years of covering Mushoku Tensei, talking to fans, talking to haters, covering the anime, and yes, doing my novel analysis series, one phrase keeps popping up over and over. Yeah, many of you may have guessed it. Mushoku Tensei is a redemption story. People that dislike the series hope that at some point Rudius is going to redeem himself. People that are neutral or like the series are just claiming that Rudius at some point is going to have redemption. Just wait. And you know, depending on what you believe a redemption story means, that might actually be true. Maybe if you distill it down to the simple idea of a flawed character seeing change, that's enough. Though, by that definition, the anime has already achieved that at this point. Rudius, once a nasty shut-in, with a massive bullying trauma, becomes a nasty reincarnate, and now he has a family and he's dedicated to his wife. Wives. But for me, Mushoku Tensei is not a redemption story. Never has been. At least for Rudius anyhow. Sure, there's great redemption stories in Mushoku Tensei. Paul is a great example of this. Dirtbag father cheats on his wife, becomes a drunk mess, attacks his son, all before correcting his mistakes, seeking forgiveness, and making the ultimate sacrifice. But Rudius, our main character, the focal point of Mushoku Tensei's story, not so much. Rudius never seeks redemption, forgiveness, or to correct his path. Which makes sense. There's no moral police here to tell him to change his ways, or to get him to say sorry. He's not giving Roxy her pantsu back and begging for forgiveness. He's not telling Edis sorry for getting handsy with you when you're younger. He's never pulling Paul to the side and saying, "Hey, Pops, sorry, I used to listen outside your door when you were going at it with Mom. Lol." Let's face it, when Rudius was at his worst, he never did much to undo his wrongdoings. With all that in mind, again, I never seen Mushoku Tensei as a redemption story, but more of a story of moving forward. Rather than correct the past or reflect on one's mistakes, Rudius always just found happiness in doing better things. Happiness in having a family he never felt that he had before. Happiness in marriage. Happiness in having a child. Happiness in having friends. It's all about protecting and nurturing what you've been blessed with. I like this. It feels good, and I don't want to lose it. Please don't take it from me. And that's good and all. I think it's a strong message. It's honestly what I felt the franchise was doing, and it made perfect sense. I love seeing someone who was discarded by society, someone people want thrown in the ditch and left to die, finding new purpose in a new life, and becoming a blessing to those that he encounters. It's a powerful message to anyone who's made massive mistakes, regretting their life decisions, a message of hope that there's a tomorrow. But then, here recently, it all sort of clicked for me. A deeper message that I think most people don't realize. And ultimately, when I discovered it, it all made sense. While the message of moving forward I just talked about is for those that have seen hardships and can relate to the struggles that Rudius is overcoming, the next one is for everyone else. For those that have not seen it, I've done quite a few videos where I respond to negative anime reviews of Mushoku Tensei. And over that series of videos, one word kept popping into my head. Over and over and over. Empathy. Yes, empathy. At some point, I realized the true message of the series. Mushoku Tensei is a challenge in empathy. This is something that took me a long time to see, because I sort of naturally seek to empathize with people. Now, I'm not tooting my own horn here. Many of my friends and past coworkers often claim that I'm a good listener. And for that very reason, I often tell people while I can't often fix their problems, I will always lend an ear. I try to hear people out and find a middle ground rather than immediately push away or pull to one direction. To be honest, this pisses off a lot of people because I'm sort of seen as a fence sitter a lot. Damn it, Andrew, choose a side. Us or them. I just naturally try to steer away from being tribal. For that reason, as I found myself wanting to figure out the characters of Mushoku Tensei, I never found an issue with seeing Rudius' fears of leaving his home and his new life, due to the bullying of his past life. I didn't struggle to see Elenice's fear of Rudius knowing that she's Sylphie's grandmother, because of the curse damaging so many relationships of her past. My heart still broke for Paul as he fought to reunite his family, despite his family including a second wife that he cheated on his first wife with. I felt the grief that Zenoba had with his lack of mana to create his beloved statues, even if the conclusion was to buy a slave. And I cried for Julie's horrible state they found her in, despite them paying an owner to bring her out of it. With this and so many cases, I never found it hard to see the hurt amidst the wrongdoings, because in the end, even those who do wrong still suffer. It never clicked for me that this was a challenge, because I never struggled to see the pain. Yet as I stated earlier, As I read reviews and posts of this series, I kept seeing a pattern between positive and negative reviews. Positive reviews acknowledge the deep character moments of struggle and overcoming, while the negative reviews only talked about the wrongdoings the same people did. The lack of empathy makes a difference in most cases whether people enjoy the series or not. Mushoku Tensei characters are some of the most flawed characters you will find in storytelling, which honestly is what makes them feel real. Let's face it, people are flawed. So if the characters aren't flawed and are too perfect, they feel fake, which is fine for most stories that aim for escapism. But for the most part, Mushoku Tensei doesn't seem to be going for that. Mushoku Tensei is going for more of a fantasy drama series, dealing with heavy subjects that most series don't want to touch. It wants to get dirty to emphasize the growth in a second try, a series of second chances, third chances, fourth, fifth, sixth, and so on. If people have an inability to see past those flaws and empathize the character's suffering, it really defeats the purpose of even consuming the series to begin with. Let me examine a few and give examples. Let's start off with Elise, the beautiful Elise. Elise opens up as an elf adventurer who just loves to bang men. About every scene that she pops up in, she's either thirsting for her next target or she's mounting her target. She seems like a slut, and she's just feeding into the male fantasies of a thirsty elf. But underneath her claims of loving to bang, Annalise is suffering from a curse that requires her to regularly bed men in order to stave off its effects. This causes her to be seen as a stain amongst her own people, thus causing her and her son to have to flee their homeland. It also led her to fear the idea of Rudius discovering the truth of her relation to Sylphie, as she didn't want to destroy the happiness that her granddaughter had found. Next, Rigerd, Papa Rigerd as I call him. Rigerd of the Superb tribe was enlisted in the past to join the Laplace War. Being a tribe of proud and powerful warriors, Rigerd ordered his men to drop their spears they were born with and carry the cursed spears that Laplace provided, thus leading them into a thirst for blood that ended in countless dead enemies, allies, entire innocent villages, and even their own families. Rigerd's hands are covered in blood, and they continue to get stained to this day. Yet, this desire to undo the wrongdoings of his past and the Laplace curse through the spears leads him down the seemingly impossible path to seek to undo hundreds of years of hate. Paul, the dirtbag Paul, is probably second only to Rudius in the amount of hate that he deserves. This guy ran away from home, trains at a training hall ran by Lilia's father, gets mad at the other students, forces himself on Lilia, deflowers her to get back at them, then runs off, goes adventuring, gets Zenith pregnant, settles down, before then hiring Lilia, constantly gropes her, then sleeps with her while Zenith is pregnant. Dude is a total dirtbag through and through. But still, despite this, after the displacement incident, fights tooth and nail to reunite people with their families, falls into massive depression, fears that his family is dead, is attacked for failing to save people, criticized by his own men who are being attacked in the streets by the nobles that they're stealing the people away from, and in the end, pays the ultimate price to save his wife and son. Then, of course, there's Rudius, the focal point of most people's ire for the series. From the beginning of the series, Rudius is introduced as a shut-in NEET, doing the unspeakable in his room while his family are mourning the death of his parents. He's kicked out, dies, and is reincarnated into another world for a second chance. Even then, he's still a nasty person. It's revealed very quickly the trigger point for his previous life's downward spiral. A horrible experience that he had with bullying at his school. The other students at the school he was attending beat him, stripped him naked, tied him to a gate, and mocked him while taking pictures of him. While it doesn't excuse his actions, it still remains the trigger point for why his mind goes down the path that it does. Sort of a skewing of his mental maturity, perverting his mind, and leaving him in a dark and terrified place. In his new life, this carries over, both the fears of leaving his home and the proclivities to perverted things. He quickly uses this new start to take advantage of women around him. Yes, including Zenith and Lilia. Grabbing their chests, putting their underwear on his face. He manipulates his father when he gets in trouble. He peeks in on Roxy and steals her pantsu. He fantasizes about grooming Sylphie before being shipped off by his father. He gets handsy with Edis. He has countless moments of unpleasant thoughts and pervy actions throughout his journey back home. He captures and gropes Linnea and Persenna in the university. He cheats on Sylphie with Roxy, and so on and so forth. In the midst of all those nasty acts of wrongdoing, Rudius still suffers. Even after being given a new life in this new world, Rudius fears leaving his home, afraid of even a glance by a cheerful villager. He fears the gates of his yard, as he sees himself strapped to it naked. Later, when he gets into a fight with Paul and Millis, he feels the eyes of everyone in the room boring down upon him. It makes him feel sick. Even later on, when he feels like he can probably talk this all over with Paul and fix everything, the idea of going back fills him with so much anxiety that he pukes. Jump forward. When Edis leaves him at the refugee camp, he blames himself and feels like he destroyed any chance at this new family that he was going to build with her. This compounds later on when he destroys his relationship with Sarah, and he nearly takes his own life. He was seeking to die up there. Stricken with ED, he lost the feeling of being human. Any moment that he would normally find arousing reminds him of his lack of basic manhood. Captured by Goliad at the university, he gets a relapse of being bullied and fears that he's going to be stripped and beat again. And finally, the moment that Rudius loses Paul and falls into a deadly state of depression. He hurts that he can't mourn his father's death along with Zenith as she has lost her mind. He can't understand why Paul would sacrifice himself for a fake son. He curses Paul for not choosing to protect his real daughters instead. But worst of all, he regrets not being able to see Paul as his father, despite Paul seeing him as his son, making the same mistake in this life that he made in his previous life. These are all sadly moments of struggle and pain that easily gets overshadowed and ignored, leading many to overlook it and instead focus on the wrongdoings. At the same time, ignoring the root cause of Rudius' perversion being his mental trauma of his past life childhood. Well, I won't claim that everyone will lack this empathy, and I can't say that those with empathy can't still hate Rudius. I also can see a pattern in the opinions that typically begins with a downplaying of the mental scars that Rudius had from his previous life. A traumatic experience that leads many people, real-life people, to self-harm and self-ending. Experiences that lead many real-life people down the path of self-destruction that unfortunately society wants to ignore and sweep under the rug. Shoot, how do I know this is true? Even a fictional character, Rudius, people don't want to exist. What do you think that means for real people? When Mushoku Tensei is airing, Rudius literally fuels engagement farmers and single-handedly funds the hosting fees for websites with journalists acting offended. Far too many hate reviewers and posts seem to completely overlook the deeper subject matters Mushoku Tensei gets into. It's like they actively ignore it. But therein lies the challenge part of this challenge of empathy. Despite Rudius, at his worst, can you empathize with his hardships? The author, Refugin, says it best himself. Because he's a controversial character, his mountain of regrets makes the act of redoing life more meaningful. Of course, I have no issues with criticizing Rudius at the beginning stage, and it's up to you to decide whether you don't want to see the story because of that. With that said, if there's someone like Rudius close to you, and that person were to have even a slight change of heart and try to start over, I sincerely hope that you won't abandon them on the spot. Well said, Refugin. Again, a challenge of empathy. So I ask you, can you empathize when someone is at their worst?